Right. It's either that or I was going to ask Marshall John. Thank you guys all very much. Thank you. And suddenly we have a budget that has 20 new police officers. Yeah, let's just get this started, and please take it away.
Great. So the next slide just gives you, well, first of all, good evening, Mayor and Trustee and fellow staff. It's nice to be here with you tonight. Rita and I continue to work on the budget and finalize it, and tonight we're going to give you the summary fund budget. But we're going to start with sales and property tax revenue 5-year trend recap. We did get another month's worth of information since the last time we presented, so we'll update you on that. We'll also go over the fund balance and reserve funds, and that's to give everyone a better understanding of the town's financial position, over the revenue and expenditures by fund, and then we'll have an open session for feedback from the BOT and questions and answers. But we will ask for questions after presenting each fund so that you don't have to wait until the very end. But we'll have an open session, and then we'll give you a status on the budget process. So the first fund that we're going to be, the first thing we're going to talk to you about is the sales tax. And so we did get one more month. We are still trending above 2019. Right now we are trending 7% above 2019. So what staff is recommending is that and what you'll see in the budget summaries that are presented to you, we are recommending that we budget at 5% over 2019 actuals. So that would mean that we're actually under budgeting what we're seeing performing this year during COVID. And the reason, like we talked last time, is we feel like we want to be conservative and be prepared for anything. I also want to mention, because I think Trustee Corvalon might not have been here, for our first work session, and that staff is prepared, the department heads are prepared as we track the sales tax in the first 2 quarters of 2020. If, of course, something catastrophic happens, we see a very big dip in the economy, we would go immediately to the contingency budgets like we did this year. So we're all prepared for that, and our budget's basically been designed that way, so that if need be, we can go ahead and reduce expenses almost immediately. We also are recommending that we, as far as a CIP budget, we talked last time, if we do receive even more in sales tax than we're projecting, and property tax as well, we had recommended setting aside 1% of those funds, of the tax funds, to be saved in a CIP fund that would then be used the following year. So instead of department heads having to figure out how to do capital improvement projects by just using their operating budget, there actually would be a specific fund set aside. And we'll be sharing with you the next time we look at the budget for 2021, we'll be looking at what's on that wish list for 2022 and beyond. For this year, you'll see when we go through each fund balance that we have called out the CIP items that will be paid for through the regular budget, and you'll see those.
Karen, could I ask a question about this?
Sure, of course.
So first of all, I'm thinking about the CIP fund, and I'm wondering, would such a fund, among other things, also even out differences between one year and the next? I mean, could that serve as a kind of a damping fund? Is that one possible use for a CIP fund, or is that inconsistent with what the CIP fund would be for?
It really isn't. It really isn't. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more, Trustee Taylor, when I talk to you about the fund balance and the net position. because really that's what the fund balance is to be able to do what you're talking about, which is even out through the years. And that is what has been happening historically with the town. But that's what the fund balance is. The CIP would be actually allocating some funds specifically out of tax dollars. And what you would want to do is get to the place where it just is coming off the top every year. Just like a certain amount goes to, let's say, the community center, although that was voted on by the public, so maybe that's not the greatest example. But you actually designate a certain percentage of your tax revenue every year that's going to be put into capital improvement budget for, facilities maintenance, dealing with a major issue that might happen, like a water main break during Frozen Dead Guy days, for instance. Just to have some funds available for those kinds of capital improvement projects, as well as addressing some major repair work. Do you understand the difference then?
Yes. I certainly also have one other additional question. I noticed that the water and sewer numbers are identical. Now, these are the tax revenues that are dedicated to those. These allocations are tax revenues coming in that are dedicated to those specific purposes, correct? Water and sewer?
In the past, a previous board of trustees some time ago determined, and I believe that it was put into, Chris, help me here. I don't believe these were voted on. I could be wrong. But the determination was made, this is how we're going to split up these tax dollars. So
that's just a convention we're using.
Yeah. And sadly, that's before my time too. So I don't know if that was something was voted on or just sort of set in place.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think it was one of those things that was determined at some point, as you divvy up the tax dollars. So there's a certain percentage that goes to the general fund. And we are going to talk more specifically about those funds and what do they encompass.
Very fine. Thank you very much.
Sure. Any other questions before we move on to the next slide?
Karen, Tanya's asking a question in the chat where she said, what does CIP stand for and where does the revenue come from?
Okay, so it's capital improvement projects. So the money, right now, there is no fund. There is no place that the money's coming from. Basically, as I said earlier, the department heads just try to find money in their operating budget. So, for instance, what we talked about 2 weeks ago was the fact that the police department has very, very old vehicles, and they have never gotten a new vehicle or even a relatively new vehicle. That would be a CIP purchase. It's a capital purchase. Over $5,000 is how we define it. And then it would be, you keep it on your balance sheet basically, and it's going to be depreciated over time. So one thing where the city and county I came from, and most municipalities will do this, and it's usually, just standard procedure that you put a certain percentage of the taxes into a designated fund just for capital improvements. And the idea is you save over years and you're ready if something major happens. Or let's say, there's been talk over the years of building a police station. We don't have one right now, we're renting. And I'm not trying to say I'm suggesting we do this, but if you don't even have a mechanism to start saving money for a future capital improvement project like that, you'll never really have that money. If instead we're just always looking at our operating budgets and saying, hey, can we squeeze out some money here to fix our roof or whatever it is we need to do, it just is challenging. So what we talked about 2 weeks ago is if we do trend better, and we're going to talk about that farther down, and actually you can see on this slide that our sales tax has been, we were 9% above in 2016, 9% above in 2017, 8% in 2018, 18 above the previous year in 2019. So if we budget right now for 2020 at 5%, there's a good chance we'll bring in more. Now that's, you know, if the pandemic doesn't just go crazy and everybody has to shut down, because really what it's about is if we have to close businesses, right? We have to go back to safer at home and we have to close businesses for extended amount of time, then we're going to be in trouble. But all things, you know, if we don't look at that for now and instead say, hey, the way we've trended, we're likely going to actually, even if we budget 5%, we're probably looking at more. And so 2 weeks ago when we had this meeting, the trustees said, yes, if we can trend higher, we are interested in a CIP fund that would be designated just for capital improvements. But what we're suggesting is that we keep that in the back of our minds, but let's wait and see how the sales tax revenue trends. Start with the first quarter. If we're still not sure what's going on, wait another quarter, and then staff can come back to the Board of Trustees and say, hey, look at how we're trending. You know, it's looking like if we start thinking about putting that 1% aside, this is about what we should be able to capture in the CIP fund. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I got it. Thanks.
Sure. Good. So the next one has to do with property taxes, and unfortunately, we still have not gotten the preliminary property tax numbers from Boulder County. Now, the good news is, as you guys know, they reassess the values every other year. This year, for the 2021 budget, they're not doing a reassessment because this is based on last year's money that they collected, or they're in the middle of collecting now, basically. So when you look at 2017 and 2019, you'll see that there was just a very slight difference in what was budgeted the previous year. So they came really close. So we're just doing the same thing this year. We're just budgeting right now exactly what we got this year. We figured that was a safe thing to do. But we keep waiting. They had hoped to get out those preliminary figures by the middle of the month. They do not send this information by email. They only send it by mail. So we've been waiting for this information to come. But right now, the numbers you'll see in the summary budget are just based on the same numbers we had for this year. And I believe, Rita, didn't you trend it and we're actually trending slightly higher than what was budgeted? Rita? We might have lost her.
Oh, here I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Aren't we trending slightly higher in property tax right now?
You know, I am looking at that and I'm trying to figure that out. Oh, you know what? Let me see. Yeah, I did not make a note of that.
Yeah, I think it was just a titch higher.
I think you're right. Yes, I think you're right. Let me look. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so there's really not much to chat about regarding property taxes. Of course, if anybody has a question, go for it. Otherwise, we'll move on to the fund balance.
I do have the numbers. Hold on. Yes, we are at 518,000 as of to date, year to date. So just slightly higher, yes.
Slightly higher. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so our next slide is addresses fund balance. So this is what Trustee Taylor was talking about essentially. So governments have two different kinds of fund balances, and one is called governmental funds, and then the other one is enterprise funds, which are more like a business fund. So we're going to talk about the government funds first. Government funds are principally supported by taxes and intergovernmental revenues. On Roman numeral 6, page Roman numeral 6 of the 2019 audit, it states that at the end of 2019, the town's government funds reported a combined fund balance of $1,662,800. That's an increase of $535,400. And that's compared to the prior year's ending balance. The government funds, the general fund includes the community center and non-major, the non-major funds, which are, I think, the streets and the conservation fund, the conservation trust fund. Yeah, conservation trust fund, street funds. So the interesting thing is that for 2019, we actually budgeted to have a loss in our general fund ending fund balance. We actually projected that we would have a loss of $173,000 in the government funds. So we budgeted to what Trustee Taylor was alluding to, that we were actually going to lose money and we were going to just use our fund balance to balance the budget. In fact, we ended up having we ended up bringing in more money and added to our fund balance. And the difference between what was budgeted and what was actual was $708,000. So I'm just telling you, I really want to share this information with you so that you understand that the position of the town has just gotten so much stronger in the last few years. And we've always budgeted very conservatively, but we've often budgeted at a loss for some of the funds with the knowledge that we would just be taking it from the general fund. Just so you guys are getting kind of, an understanding of how we do the budgeting.
And this is why now would be an excellent time to build out a CIP, since we have the additional funds.
Exactly.
Let's put that spare away for a year when we actually do lose money.
Exactly.
I think that was why that was such an appealing view to the board the last time you presented it.
Right. And on the next slide, as we continue our conversation about fund balance, I also wanted to point out that this includes funds that are reserved. So for the general fund, and that includes streets and parks and the police department and administration and town clerk's office, we have, and this is in a separate account. So we have a separate bank account that has these reserve funds in it. And in the reserve fund account out for the general fund, there's $110,448 that was given to us from BCHA for the Tungsten Village development in lieu of dedication of land for public use. Now, they did still put the trail in that they had agreed on, but they did this as well. So that money is sitting in reserves. There's also $36,500 in there in reserves from the parking lease that we had with Eldora for 2 years. The agreement was that the money that was generated through this parking revenue would be reserved for park improvements. So you've got this just a little less than $150,000 that you have in reserves. And I'm pointing this out because this may become an important topic of conversation. Let's say, you get the GOCO grant that PROZAP presented to us and they're going to be applying for, and we are able to start doing improvements in the park. You might want to have a conversation down the road about, do you want to utilize these funds? Because these funds, staff isn't going to just decide to use them. We would look to the Board of Trustees for direction on how these funds are being used. Any questions or comments about that before we move on to the next slide? Okay, so next we're going to talk about the proprietary funds, which are the enterprise funds. So the town of Netherland maintains two proprietary funds, are the water and the sewer funds. The water and sewer utilities are financed and operated in a manner similar to private business enterprise. So it's not your typical government funded by taxes type of programs and services. The idea is to try to pay for the services you're providing through fees and whatnot. And of course, that hasn't happened. I mean, we're using tax dollars. We also have gotten substantial amounts of grants so that we could build infrastructure. And then, of course, 0% loans as well. So, but the idea that's the difference between the government funds and the enterprise funds, is that the enterprise operate more like a business would operate. And that's why instead of a fund balance, although it is called a fund balance on the budget sheet, just so everything's in alignment, it's really about your net position. It speaks more to your balance sheet, as it were. The statement of net position for these funds present information on assets and liabilities. And then the difference between the two is what's reported as a net position. So in the 2019 audit, it states on Roman numeral page Roman numeral 3, that the net position for the enterprise funds increased by $886,905. So again, you might see sometimes that we're going to be operating a little bit in the red, and that is just an understanding that is going to be the fund balance is what's going to help pay for that and balance it out. Because like Trustee Taylor has been saying, you know, some years are really good and some years are not so good. And what you want to do is to be able to be consistent in the services that you're providing, especially when it comes to things like utilities. And so that's why we have a fund balance, you know, that's why we've used the fund balance in this way in the past. Are there any questions about this slide? Otherwise, we'll move on to the last one about enterprise funds. No questions? Okay, so we also have money in reserves in this same account that I told you about. We have one account that is just for money that's in reserves. And we've got $242,000 in sewer infrastructure improvements and expansion. And we have $474,000 for water infrastructure improvements and expansion. So the idea of this money is to be able to, if we have to expand one of the facilities, or again, something major happens and I don't know, we have to put a new roof on or whatever it is, we have some money for it. We also always, as you guys know, leverage these kind of funds to try to get grant money. So let's say hypothetically, a few years, 5 years, you know, 5 to 10 years down the road, we have to expand the wastewater treatment plant. We will have increased, hopefully, you know, the amount of money that's in this reserved account, and then we would leverage it to try to double or triple it through grant money. And then if we need to add on one of those 0% loans, if we do it correctly, and that is how we would be able to expand our utilities facilities. Any thoughts, comments, or questions about that? Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to move on to the general fund. So hopefully, I'm sure everybody can see that really well, and you also receive this information. So on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see that we're doing a comparative. We're showing you the comparative between what was budgeted in 2020 and what was budgeted in 2021. And in some cases, it makes a lot of sense. I'm also suggesting that you look closely at 2019 actuals, because the actuals are where you're going to see, especially when it comes to revenue, what the actuals were in 2019 is going to be a more realistic number for revenues than what we were projecting in 2020. In 2020, you can see that we actually budgeted, because we do the budget now, right? So we hadn't, and we get our tax revenue 2 months in arrears. So we only had about a half a year's worth of sales tax at the time we did the 2020 budget. So we were very conservative, and we actually budgeted in 2020 what ultimately ended up being a substantially less than what actually came in 2019. So that's why I'm saying, you know, we did the comparative as we've done in the past, but also look at the 2019 actuals when you really begin to analyze these numbers. Our goal when we were putting this budget together was to have as little increase as possible. We tried to stay within, you know, to make sure each fund was balanced and to try not to draw too much from the fund balance. What's interesting about 2019 is, as I told you, we actually budgeted, projected to have a $132,000 deficit, where it says change in net assets, but in actuality, we had an increase of 199,000. So that's why I'm saying, you know, you want to be looking at both columns. And of course, we're happy to answer any questions. You'll see that in 2020, we budgeted to have, again, a decrease in our fund balance, but we're already trending much higher than that. Because when we went to the contingency budgets, all the department heads have been amazing. They have really cut their expenses. And you would have seen that in the last financials that Rita sent to you. The August financials make it really clear the fund balances, all the fund balances are doing much better than projected, which is why I want you just to take it with a grain of salt when you look at what was budgeted for 2020 when it comes to especially the revenues and then also the fund balance. Because right now, like I said, our fund balance is actually doing really well. And that's why we, as you know, Rita and I feel really comfortable and the department heads when they presented these budgets to us, to present a budget that in this case, for the general fund, even though through operations, we were only going to have to, you know, in this hypothetical projected budget, we would have to dip into the fund balance for about $30,000, which if you look at what was budgeted in 2020, that was about the same. But then when you add in the CIP, which again, we have no budget for CIP, there's no CIP fund per se, it's just coming out of people's operating budgets. That's $54,071. And then that brings the projected balance from the fund balance to 83,000. As far as what is in the CIP for the general fund, that includes $31,571 that we have to pay, and that's for our plow. We bought a 200,000 plus plow in 2017 at the end of the year, and we are making payments on it. So that's a fixed capital improvement cost that we just have to pay every year. We also included $12,500 for a PD vehicle, whether that's just a nice used one, or if we end up getting 0% financing, which we're pretty confident we could get pretty close to 0% financing and finance it over, you know, 4 or 5 years, a new one. There's also $10,000 in there for body cameras and other equipment that we have to purchase in order to be in compliance with the police accountability law that passed at the state level. So that's what's in that CIP budget. It's not very much, You know, when you look at all the different departments that the general fund comprises, and of course our most, you know, two of our most expensive, which is the public works, which is the streets and parks, not the utilities, and our police department. Everybody worked really hard to keep their budgets down. Some costs we can't help. Some costs just increase, and that's just what we're stuck with. But everywhere that they could, our department heads were very conscientious and really stepped up to the plate and tried to make this a reasonable budget, also knowing that they might have to go to contingency budgets. So I think those were kind of the big points I wanted to make. Did anybody have questions about this particular fund before we move on to the next one? Good?
Hi, this is Eric.
Sure. Hi, Eric.
Sorry, I'm just looking at stuff and it's hard
Sure.
to formulate questions rapidly. While admin and finance will go down in terms of cost from 2020, and why, for instance, we might see law enforcement going up by 50 grand or so.
Okay, so the law enforcement one, I had that note about what those things were. You know, I should have gotten all the details out too.
Also seeing public works going down. I was just wondering why that would go down from 2020.
I do know that some of the reasons why some things are going down, like administration and finance, is because when somebody who's been around a long time leaves and we bring in somebody new, it's usually a substantial decrease. And so we actually have seen some of that throughout the budget. Oh, I know. Thank you. The police one, we added in, and we actually talked about this a couple weeks ago. Larry made his presentation and he talked about some of the increases that they had to make in their budget. And one of them was $10,000 just to have some sort of line item where if we had something similar to the house explosion, like we did this year, there's actually a budget for some of these costs, because right now we don't. The police budget is so tight, there isn't any room for any kind of emergency type things. The other thing for that 50,000, there is increases in salaries, and you know, that's a representation there as well. But they also need to scan all of their reports. Everything's in hard copy right now, and they need to scan, and actually they would pay a company, and it's like 8,000 or something. And Larry, if you want to talk about this, you're welcome to. We're trying to clear up their storage. They have so much papers and evidence and things in writing that they could just scan and basically save, you know, electronically and clear up a lot of space. So those are the two things that are first coming to my mind. I had written a note somewhere, and I don't know what I did with it to account for that increase. It is also, if they do hire a one more officer who then would bring in revenue through, they would be a traffic cop for a majority of the time they're here. And the revenue that they would generate would pretty much offset that. Larry, is there anything else you want to say about that $50,000 increase? I think I've covered at least half of it, if not most of it.
Yeah, exactly. So we would like to try to get to a paperless system. Most of the other agencies are paperless. Right now we've got, 15 years worth of paper boxes stored up that ideally, if we could get them scanned in, those reports would actually be saved to some type of cloud-based system, but we're finding more and more now that we need more data storage as well, and I believe there was additional money requested for that to update the server, because we're putting more stuff on the server as opposed to just burning disks and saving photos like that. And like I said, everything's getting scanned into the server instead of perpetually, saved in two places. And I'd like to get away from saving it in two places.
So would it be just because it is the most significant deviation from the previous year's budget in terms of expenditures, would it be safe to say that some of those expenses are one-time expenses and some of them are maybe ongoing?
Yeah, well, for sure. So like the scanning would be a one-time deal, because if we could get to that point where we could, get all of our old paperwork scanned in electronically, then we could get rid of it. That would be a one-time deal. I think, computer use, computer hardware and software is going to be an ever-growing. Seems like it's always gotten bigger. So.
Thanks for bringing that up, Larry, because that was the other thing that I wanted to mention, is that there is some security protocol that really should be followed, that our IT consultant has been requesting that we do for the police. And I'm not a super IT person, so I can't give you the details, but it is something we budgeted for. And I know there was a couple items that I think one was 4,800 and another was, I can't remember. Another thing we did put in the budget. Our IT consultant said it really keeps getting pushed every year, and he really recommends that it happens this year.
This is Trustee Taylor, and if I'm recalling properly from 2 weeks ago, one other issue was the police vehicles are in need of repair or replacement, and we've been going with fairly old used vehicles, and they've actually been fairly expensive to maintain over time. And so some of that budget, if I recall from 2 weeks ago, was for vehicle maintenance replacement.
That is true. We did increase vehicle maintenance because there's a couple of them that are worth saving, but they need some work. As you all talked a couple weeks ago, we have more vehicles than we need, and a lot of them are just ready to we need to just say goodbye to them. But there are a few that are really worth fixing, so we did increase that as well. Thank you, Trustee Taylor. And what we're going to do is basically today, it's a work session, and what we're trying to do, what's going to be helpful to Rita and I, is if you guys feel like we're going in the right direction, we're going to put all the details for this, and you will get that, and you will get it. Our goal is a week before our October 6th meeting, if not sooner, so that you can really look at all the detail associated with each one of these line items. And Eric, that way too, if you've got specific questions, based on those details, you can send them to me and Rita and Larry if it's a PD thing, and we'd be happy to get in front of that and help you understand it and take your feedback. Any other questions before we move on to the community center? Okay, so we'll move on to the community center. And so what we did is we went ahead and budgeted revenues equal to what we had budgeted for 2020. It is still very much up in the air. If we are able to open it up fully and rent it fully and do things the way we've done in the past, we would probably actually do better than what we've projected. But we decided to just keep it kind of the same and did not increase expenditures by very much at all. And we're operating with not only a balanced budget, but a budget that would add back to the general fund $16,400. Now, we all know that the is very reliant on earned revenue. It operates kind of like between these two types of funds, right? They get a lot of tax dollars, but it's also earned revenue. They do have to operate like a business in some sense. And so what we did was we removed $7,500 from their from their capital improvements. Right now, in their capital line item, you'll see there's nothing. Last year, there was $7,500, or I'm sorry, 2020. This year, we have $7,500 in there. And the idea was to make improvements on the stone garage, to hook up utilities to it. Well, for lots of reasons, COVID being number one, but also we had a very small staff for public works for 6 months of the year because we froze hiring. There just wasn't the capacity to be able to hook up the utilities. Now, I've asked Dawn if it's possible to get it done this year, but it's really reliant upon the weather and the status of the public works team. Now we did just hire one new person and we're in the process of hiring a second person. So things could change quickly. And if the weather holds out, we might be able to get some of that done. But normally what we would do is we would just say, hey, you know, we can roll that over and just do it in 2021. My question to you all is, do you want us to go ahead and add that back with the understanding that we will track, you know, revenues in the first quarter and then into the second quarter? And unless, you know, we're doing well, if it doesn't make any sense, we just won't do it. So I guess I'm looking for some feedback on that. And Dawn knows that if the COVID hits again really bad and we have to go to contingency budget, she's prepared for that. But how do you feel about this one line item as far as CIP and improving the stone garage?
Yes.
Add it back in.
This is Chris. I agree. I think we should at least plan for it. I mean, like you said, we are obviously able to adjust, and if things don't really improve, pull it back out again. But it's easier to pull out than put back. So I'd say let's try and hold on to it, and because I think that could be a really interesting new facility for the community center, but with the understandings that it may not happen next year.
This is Julian. I concur. That makes sense.
Great. Does anyone go ahead?
I was just saying, I'd really like to see it happen.
Well, and we're not giving up on this year. You know, it could, but I which is if it doesn't happen this year, let's make sure it's in the budget for next year. And then, as I said, you know, we're all going to be waiting. We're all going to be watching the tax revenue and the earned revenue and tracking it. Every single department is. The community center just got hit really hard, and I know you all know that, because they are so reliant on the earned revenue. So we will add that back in. So when we present on October 6th, we'll have added that back into this budget, which is still going to more than balance, you know, on paper. Now, again, I think you guys know we have a really good track record. If we need to go to contingency budgets, we will. And if they need to reduce their expenses, the department heads have been amazing, and I know they will as well.
Hey, Karen, it's Larry.
Sure.
Hey, can I just say something real quick about the stone building and those other, and the bio buildings that are right there?
Sure.
You know, those, just some history from my perspective. You know, they've been here for quite a while. I've been here quite a while, and really nothing productive has happened with those buildings over the years. And it was just the town invest back into their own stuff. Also with the old Magnolia School building, and granted, it's not an overnight thing that we're just going to drop, you know, $300,000 and make it brand new. But if a little bit can get spent every year on them, they could be nice, viable buildings for either retail or some other type of use, or daycare. I mean, it could be anything. But right now, they're just nothing but rotting buildings. So that's what I'm trying to do with the bio building on our end. We're putting a little bit into it every year, and try to make it a functional building, so that whether we have it one day or somebody else has it one day, it's at least a functional building down the road. That's all I got to say.
Thanks, Larry. Okay, so moving on to the water fund. So the water fund, our budget for operating revenues and operating expenses is in the black. And then when you add in the debt service and the capital improvements, it still ends up in the plus. So the water budget's looking really good. And this is what we have traditionally seen, that the water budget performs pretty well. I did want to just talk a little bit about the debt and capital contra, because that could be a little confusing. Those are basically balance sheet reconciliations, and they offset the financial statements. They don't really fit into the budget. In the past, our past treasurer thought it was helpful to have that information in here. Rita and I are just kind of examining if that's something we feel like we should keep bringing forth every budget or not. And we're talking to the auditor as well. But that's more because these are enterprise funds, which are more like business funds. You do have a balance sheet, as it were, and a net position. So that's really what those contra count line items are. So go ahead.
This is Julian. I have a question about debt service. Just a quick question. Is
Sure.
debt service both principal and interest?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it is. Okay, so in the CIP, it's $100,000, and that includes $15,000 for a shared vehicle, and that's what Chris talked to you about a couple weeks ago. He's trying to get grant money to help subsidize the purchase of an electrical vehicle for the utilities department, and it would be shared between the water and the sewer fund. And then $85,500 is for infrastructure improvements, and that includes fire hydrant and valve replacements, sizing the Big Springs distribution system. So that's what dollars is for. One thing too, I wanted to talk a little bit about our PIF fees. So what we've been doing is we budget a certain amount for PIF fees, and we're pretty conservative, but using pretty good information on what we think is going to be built, what's in the pipeline, that type of thing. If we end up bringing in more PIF fees than budgeted, so we didn't need to use it, budgeted, that's what goes into the reserve account. So when I say we have $200,000 some dollars in the sewer, we have $400,000 in the water, that is where the money comes from. So when I started here, there really wasn't any kind of separate account or any kind of reserved account. With monies that were budgeted to be brought in through the through PIFs, and what was bringing in the operating budget, that is what we put into savings, and that's how we got these reserve funds. I was going to just point out, are there any questions about the water fund? Because then we can move to everyone's favorite, the sewer fund. And in the sewer fund, we've got the same kind of story going where for operations, we're looking really good. It's then when you start looking at the other expenditures, the debt service and capital improvements, that we end up with a very slight impact to the net position, but it's only $35,000, which is less than what was budgeted in 2020. And so we're feeling really good about it. As far as the CIP budget goes for sewer, that $115,000, it again includes that shared vehicle. It also is repairs and replacements of the collection system, and that includes pipes, manhole repairs and upgrades, and jetting the sewer mains. So any questions, feedback about the sewer fund? Okay, so then we're going to go to the street fund. And this one, even though it looks like the change in net assets is negative, it's actually because the first year when we collected, the end balance was basically the same. If you look, it's basically been rolling over money to be used in the future. So we're still, the fund balance is still going to be very much in the plus at 80,000. And it's a very simple budget. I mean, the money that comes in through this tax can only be used for streets. It's used to buy streets, you know, materials. It's being used for large equipment like the asphalt paving tool that makes a big difference. I think Chris talked about that either at the last board meeting or at this 2 weeks ago at this work session. It's for stabilizing and paving the roads, and we've seen the outcome of that in the last year since we did start getting money from this street fund. And we did buy a used paver, I'm pretty sure it was. Chris couldn't be here tonight, but I know we did purchase a large piece of equipment also. So, you know, we feel good about this one. It's a healthy fund balance. There's always more things that you can use money for to improve the streets here. Any question about that before we move to the Health and Human Services Fund? Okay, so we were very conservative in our numbers as far as what kind of revenue we would bring in. As you all know, with COVID, we don't have nearly as many STRs licensed. Even the ones that are licensed are not operating at the same level that they used to. So we were just very conservative, and we could always do a supplemental budget if we end up bringing in a lot more money. That would be a lovely problem to have. And you know, we looked at the language that the board gave staff and directions of how to use this money, and you know, up to 99%, I think. At least 50% and up to 99%, I think it was, could be used for health and human services, and the rest for law enforcement. So we just split it up. I just did a 90-10 split, which we're looking for direction here. If you guys would rather see it split a different way, we can certainly do that as well. So right now we have 5,400 allocated for health and human services and 600 for law enforcement. Any thoughts or comments or direction for staff?
What was that?
Oh, I was going to say that looks good. I was wondering if any of the health and human services money could be used to encourage like COVID testing for the kids going back to school or that sort of thing. Like, where do we talk about what the money gets used for?
Well, we'd have to have the money. Right now, it's still hypothetical. We haven't even collected any yet. And I believe Miranda said that we would be collecting it in end of December, beginning of January.
Oh, so you only once a year from everybody.
You collect
not
it quarterly. Tanya will collect it quarterly, but so the quarter ends in September at the end of this month, but then they have until the end of December to pay their first quarter.
Right.
So there's a 3-month delay. So we won't see any of the money until 2021.
Okay. So next year we can talk about what the money gets used for.
Well, and as we start building it up and as we make our monthly financial reports to you guys, you can at that point say, hey, $2,000 in there, you know, and as long as it's used for one of these two items, you know, you could give staff direction at that point too.
Okay.
Right. We were talking at one point about a Health and Human Services committee, but nothing has happened on that yet, and may not happen. But even without a Health and Human Services committee, we could certainly have individual board members proposing distributions based on information they have and experts they could bring in. And so, yeah, lots of ways I think that we would be able to distribute those funds amicably.
Amicably.
Anything else about this fund?
Just that I do have some proposals coming down the pipeline for how we might use some of this money that I will share with some of my fellow trustees, and that hopefully we get more than what is projected here, and more people register, and yeah, that would be great. But I'd be going for a 99-1% split, but I can live with a 90-10 if that's what other folks are more interested in.
Well, we just did that because we weren't sure because it was a movable target. So we'll take direction.
I mean, my thinking is that at the very early stage that this fund exists, like what good is that $600 really? And it might go further, I think, if it was mostly all dedicated to HHS, but that's my thinking on it.
Does anybody else have any direction for staff? Because we can adjust it before we bring it back. Going one?
This is John. I was just going to note that until we actually know how much money is actually going to be coming in, it may be premature to think very carefully about how it is budgeted. But I'm going to be very curious to see how much money actually comes in for this budget, and based upon that, I think we will all find it a little bit easier using actual physical dollars to think through how it would be allocated. But I could certainly understand that if what we're confronting is a health and human services crisis, I'm all for 99 to 1%. But if what we're confronting is a crisis of houses blowing up, okay, I'm prepared. I think at that point we may adjust it for our police force. But I think I'm mostly interested in seeing how much money is actually there before thinking too hard about how to distribute it. So I'm feeling okay with the 90-10 for now as a hypothetical.
Should we split the difference and give law enforcement 300 and the rest to Health and Human Services? Does that feel good to people?
As I say, I'm still okay with 90-10, but I'll yield to the group.
I mean, I would be happy to just keep it 90-10 right now until we, like Julian says, know what we're actually going to bring in. It wouldn't be the worst thing to just build up a little bit for law enforcement here, just in case one of the police cruisers needs, some work done. And it's not necessarily in the budget. I know. So.
Yeah, but I mean, I will say I really would not like to see money raised here to be used for police cruisers. I feel like that we have that's why we're doing all this discussion of CIP and everything like that, and why we're setting that money aside. So, like, kind of vaguely earmarking cash from different funds for police vehicles doesn't seem like something that I would like to do. I mean, I know that the police deal with health services very frequently, that they have to deal with people who are overdosing and have to reach out to folks who are dealing with addiction problems. And I would like to see this money go to support those kinds of activities in the police department more than anything else.
Well, I totally hear that. I mean, like having a NICOD unit in the police vehicles is one example of that, where most of what the police work we do, their toolbox is their vehicle. So if that means adding in a few more things that go kind of in that toolbox of the police cruiser, they can then actually provide better health and human services if they are dealing with an overdose situation. So it's just
Yeah,
a
that
thought
makes
to
sense
keep
to me.
in there. Those things definitely cost money. They start to stack up.
I'd like to propose that, it sounds like, Eric, you have some proposals for ways we could look at using this funding. So I'd like to suggest, since this is all hypothetical money at this point, let's keep it at this, this 90-10 is a kind of a nice round thing, but let's put on the agenda for it's probably the second meeting in January to actually look at what we've brought in. Start looking at, if it's matching any predictions, and we can always do a supplemental budget to adjust this. And when we start talking about your proposals about how to use it, if it does look like it's something that could really benefit from an extra few $100s, then we can really adjust it then. But as of right now, this is kind of a premature discussion with hypothetical dollars, in my opinion.
Yeah, that sounds fine to me.
I just want to throw out there, let me think of a few ideas that money could go towards, that we could, as the PD, get back into the community, kind of on an HHS level where it's needed. And just off the top of my head, I can think of emergency shelter for people, emergency food for people, things that problems we can't solve at 10 o'clock at night unless we have cash to make that happen. Just a thought, throwing it out there.
That's a great idea, Larry. That's a great idea.
Thanks, Larry.
Excellent.
Thank you. Okay, so the next slide is just talking about the next steps in the budget process. I'm sure you guys have this memorized at this point, but we'll be bringing the budget with the details for the October 6th meeting. And we've kept that meeting pretty light so that, even though you do have you'll have an executive session at 6 p.m. There's only, I think we may be the only real kind of meaty substance on the agenda, and we will give you all the details. And then October 15th, after we get direction from you, and if we have to make some changes to it, then we will post this draft budget, make it clear that it's just a draft, and take feedback from the public. And we leave that posted for 2 weeks. Then we'll come back on November 10th because of the election on November 3rd. Our meeting will not take place that night. On November 10th, we'll have a public hearing where we will again bring the budget to you. We will also have some more information to you. I think at that point is when maybe November 17th is when we bring you the fee schedule. If we can get the fee schedule done though by the 10th, we'll bring it then too. And then you can November 17th to review it one more time before we bring it back to you for December 1st for the approval. And then we have to have the budget book, which is that for those of you who have been around, it's a book that we put out by January 31st every year that's required by the state. And it's a narrative along with all of the numbers to show basically how we spent funds in 2020, but it also looks forward to 2021. So any questions about the next steps or any of the things that we've talked about tonight? Any direction or feedback for staff? Are we going to get done like almost an hour early, people? This is pretty exciting.
I'd just like to say that I think you've done a good job overall, and I like the strategy.
Good to hear.
Yes, it's looking good. Thank you, Karen.
Sure, and Rita and the department heads. This was very much a collective process.
All of our town staff.
All right. I guess we're going to be ending an hour early. What do you know?
You gotta like it.
I would remind, any trustees, as you start chewing on this tonight, later tonight or later in the week, you can shoot town staff questions or comments or thoughts. And we can also start, emails between ourselves talking about if we have different priorities and different ideas of, how you want to start. If there's any little adjustments we want to make, now's the time to do it instead of 2 months from now when we're trying to finalize. So this is the best opportunity. If you see things you think might be good to change or you have questions, now is the ideal time to really address those.
And once we send out the detailed budget to you all, which Rita and I have it pretty solid, so it may not take maybe another week or so. Then you can ask us questions, and just be sure that if you are talking with each other, never more than 2 people by email.
Right.
Just to abide by the sunshine law, or 2 people in person. So if you get to 3, that's not okay. But anyways, as the Mayor Larson said, it's really helpful for staff if we can work with you behind the scenes to answer your questions. So by the time we present it in the board meeting, October 6th, we're not going to have to dive into every line item, every detail. Hopefully we've kind of done that work behind the scenes, and, it just saves a lot of time in those meetings.
Yeah, this is Alan again. I just like to put out the question I had previously, which is, will we have $1,000 for, the Colorado Communities for Climate Action?
We budgeted for that, Alan.
Great.
Yeah, I thought, I'm sorry, I thought I replied to you a while ago, but yeah, we put it in the budget. And I actually said you could go ahead and tell those people that your group, that we would be able to do that. And do you know, is that due this year? Because I kind of thought it was due this year.
I'm not sure the exact timing, but I'll find out.
Okay.
What is that for?
Colorado Communities for Climate Action. There are 35 communities. We've been a member for several years. They're a lobbying organization. It's basically all the communities in Colorado who have ambitious goals for addressing climate change, ourselves included. And it's been a great organization to be a part of. And then part of it's a lobbying arm to work with the legislature to make sure that we get the kind of legislation we need to move a climate agenda forward. Most recently, we were testifying on air quality issues with respect to the oil and gas industry and transportation. So trying to get a handle on all the emissions. And so I do think they provide an excellent service.
Nice. So it's like a membership fee.
Right.
Yeah.
It's one of the groups we're members of.
Yeah.
EML and Dr. Cog and yeah.
So Alan had reached out. Alan had reached out because when we did the 10%, 15% budget contingencies, it was looking harder for us to be able to pay some of these membership fees. So we basically negotiated with them, and we do every year, to be honest with you, because they're open to that. So the board collectively decided to become members years ago, and every year we sort of negotiate and try to get the membership dollars down. It is really, something the board has collectively in the past decided it was important to be a member of. It's just that during tricky times like this, it's sometimes hard to pull those dollars together, but we were able to find the money.
Okay. I was getting some emails about the recycling at the post office not being covered anymore. Alan, did you guys ever look into who was going to pay for that?
Well, actually, I sent Jonathan an email to see if there was anything available from DDA, but I hadn't heard back. Jonathan, do you have any sense of that?
I would think they would.
Probably
There
not.
most likely will be our budget meetings tomorrow morning. I think 10 to 11 or 10 to 11:30 something. So I can definitely bring that up. And I believe Barb Hart brought it up, so and was hoping to get it as a budget item.
Awesome.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate the input from you all, and we look forward to sending you more information, the details, and then presenting it publicly October 6th.
This is Trustee Taylor. A quick message to Chief Johns. Don't forget to text me this week, and we'll do an electric vehicle tour.
No, sir, I will do that. Maybe, are you available tomorrow? I have coverage tomorrow to help me out.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's see if we can't get together tomorrow.
Certainly.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you again, town staff. Thank you, trustees. Thank you, members of the public here. Talk to you all again in a week.